My neighbor's husband sat at his kitchen table last winter with a small glucose meter beside his coffee cup, checking it the way some men check the weather, out of habit more than hope. He had cut out sugar entirely, replaced his morning toast with a protein bar from the pharmacy that cost nearly $5, and his numbers still crept up after lunch most days. Meanwhile, his wife was quietly steaming a pot of green beans from their own garden for supper, something she'd done every summer of their marriage, never once thinking of it as anything more than a side dish. Nobody had told him that the plain vegetable sitting 3 feet from him might be doing more for his numbers than the bar he was paying for. That gap between what we assume is powerful and what actually is powerful is where most of the confusion around blood sugar lives. Here is the idea I want you to carry through this whole video, because it will save you more money and more worry than almost anything else I could tell you. Good blood sugar management rarely comes from one clever food eaten occasionally. It comes from ordinary foods, the kind that don't advertise themselves, eaten consistently enough that your body can rely on them meal after meal. There is no single vegetable or spice that fixes a pattern built over years, but there is a small group of foods that, used regularly, genuinely support the kind of steady blood sugar most people are chasing. My grandmother Esther never once used the words insulin resistance or glycemic response, not that I ever heard in her kitchen. But she knew which meals left a man steady through an afternoon of fieldwork and which ones left him dragging by 3 o'clock, and she built her cooking around that observation, without ever needing a name for the mechanism behind it. She served beans with nearly everything, kept vinegar on the table at every meal, and never once served white bread without something alongside it to slow a body down. She was working from decades of watching her own family, not from a textbook, and it turns out much of what she did lines up closely with what modern research on fiber, protein, and food pairing actually shows. My name is Elias Yoder, and I farm in Lancaster County. Today I want to walk you through 11 foods that genuinely support healthy blood sugar, why each one earned its place on this list rather than simply sounding impressive, and how to use them without turning your kitchen into something that feels more like a laboratory than a home. None of what I tell you today replaces a doctor's advice or any medication a person may need, and I want to say that plainly before we go any further. Let's start with the food most people already half trust but rarely use correctly, and that's beans, specifically something like black beans or chickpeas. A cup of cooked black beans carries around 15 grams of fiber, a remarkable amount for something so inexpensive. And that fiber matters here because soluble fiber slows how quickly sugar from a meal enters your bloodstream, giving your body more time to respond gradually, rather than all at once. The difference between beans straight from a low-sodium can, rinsed well, and the sugary baked bean varieties, loaded with brown sugar and molasses, is significant, since the second version undoes much of what made the food useful in the first place. Beans stirred into a soup, added to a salad, or served simply alongside rice, make this an easy, regular habit rather than a special occasion food, and Esther's own bean soup, thick with carrots and a little ham bone for flavor, was on our table most weeks of the year, without her ever calling it anything other than supper. Vinegar deserves its own mention here, and it surprises people because it isn't a food in the traditional sense at all, more a habit to build around a meal. A tablespoon or two of vinegar taken before a starchy meal, diluted in water, or used generously in a salad dressing, appears in research to modestly slow the rate at which your stomach empties its contents into your small intestine, which in turn slows how quickly the sugar from that meal reaches your blood. This is not a dramatic effect, and I want to be honest about that, but a small effect used at every meal adds up in a way that a rare, dramatic effort never does. Plain apple cider vinegar, with the cloudy sediment still visible, sometimes called the mother, is the version worth choosing over the perfectly clear filtered kind, since that cloudiness indicates less processing has stripped away. Now here's a food that changes the comparison people usually make. Oats have a mixed reputation, and rightly so, because instant, heavily sweetened oatmeal packets behave almost nothing like steel-cut or old-fashioned rolled oats cooked plain. The fiber in whole oats, particularly a type called beta-glucan, forms a kind of gel in your digestive tract that slows sugar absorption meaningfully, but that same beta-glucan is largely intact in slow-cooked oats and considerably reduced in the instant, pre-processed versions, which also often carry several teaspoons of added sugar per packet. A bowl of plain oats with cinnamon and a small handful of nuts stirred in, rather than the flavored packet from a box, gives you the benefit the food was known for in the first place. Leafy greens like spinach and kale belong here too, though for a quieter reason than most people expect. They're low enough in carbohydrates that they barely register on blood sugar at all, and yet they carry magnesium, a mineral involved in how your cells respond to insulin, the hormone responsible for moving sugar out of your bloodstream and into your cells for use. Research has associated low magnesium levels with poorer blood sugar control, though I want to be careful here, since association isn't the same as certainty, and greens alone won't correct a significant deficiency. Still, a regular side of sautéed spinach or a handful of kale worked into a soup is an easy, low-effort habit that costs almost nothing and rarely hurts. If you've noticed a pattern already forming in these first foods, you're seeing exactly what I hoped you'd see. Fiber keeps showing up, again and again, in different forms, and that repetition is not an accident. It's the single most consistent thread running through nearly everything that genuinely helps here. Fatty fish like salmon or sardines earns a different kind of place on this list. They don't directly lower blood sugar the way fiber does, but the omega-3 fatty acids they carry are associated in research with reduced inflammation, and chronic low-grade inflammation is increasingly understood to play a role in how well your cells respond to insulin over time. A simple piece of salmon, baked plain with herbs, twice a week is a realistic habit for most households, and it stands in useful contrast to heavily breaded fried versions, where the preparation adds refined carbohydrates and calories, without adding anything the fish itself was valuable for. Now let me pause for something worth saying plainly. Since this channel exists to help people think clearly about food rather than chase the next trend. And staying subscribed means you'll catch the next one without missing it. That's all I wanted to say about it, so let's continue. Cinnamon comes up constantly in conversations about blood sugar, and it deserves a fair, honest look rather than either dismissal or exaggeration. Some research suggests cinnamon may modestly improve insulin sensitivity, though the effect size in most studies is small, and results have been inconsistent across different trials. What I can tell you plainly is that cinnamon is inexpensive, essentially risk-free for most people in normal cooking amounts, and a genuinely pleasant way to flavor oats, coffee, or baked apples without added sugar. So even if the effect is modest, there's little reason not to use it regularly as part of a broader pattern rather than a standalone fix. Nuts, particularly almonds and walnuts, matter here for a reason people often overlook. A small handful, roughly a quarter cup, carries healthy fats and a bit of protein that, eaten alongside a higher carbohydrate food, can blunt how sharply your blood sugar rises afterward, since fat and protein both slow digestion, compared to carbohydrate eaten alone. The distinction worth remembering at the store is between plain or lightly salted nuts and the honey-roasted or candy-coated versions, since the second kind adds back exactly the sugar you were trying to manage in the first place. A small handful with an apple, rather than the apple alone, is a simple, practical pairing. Berries deserve mention here too, and this is where a common myth is worth correcting gently. Many people assume all fruit should be avoided entirely when managing blood sugar, but berries like blueberries and strawberries are relatively low in sugar compared to their fiber content, especially compared to fruit juice, which strips away the fiber and leaves behind concentrated sugar that hits your bloodstream far faster. A cup of fresh or frozen berries, unsweetened, added to plain yogurt, is a realistic way to satisfy a sweet craving without the same impact as a glass of juice or a sugary dessert. Here's one that looks almost too plain to belong on a list like this, and that's plain Greek yogurt. It carries meaningful protein, often around 15 to 20 grams per cup depending on the brand, and protein alongside a meal slows digestion in much the same way fat does, helping to flatten the blood sugar response to whatever else is on the plate. The difference between plain and flavored yogurt is enormous here, since many flavored cups carry as much sugar as a small dessert, quietly undoing the very benefit the yogurt was providing. Plain yogurt with a few berries stirred in gives you both foods working together, rather than one canceling the other out. Garlic and onions round out this list in a way that surprises people, since they're rarely discussed alongside blood sugar at all. Some research suggests compounds in both may modestly support healthy blood sugar and cholesterol patterns, though as with cinnamon, the effect is better understood as a small, supportive piece of a broader pattern than a dramatic intervention on its own. What matters more practically is that both are inexpensive, used almost daily in ordinary cooking already, and require no special effort to include regularly, which is exactly the kind of low-effort consistency that tends to matter more than any single powerful ingredient used rarely. Now let me bring all of this together, because the individual foods matter less than what connects them. Beans gave us fiber in one of its most concentrated, affordable forms. Vinegar showed that a habit, not just a food, can meaningfully slow digestion. Oats prove that preparation changes everything, since the same grain can behave two completely different ways depending on how it's processed. Leafy greens brought magnesium quietly into the picture. Salmon addressed inflammation rather than sugar directly. Cinnamon and garlic and onions each offered modest, low-risk support rather than dramatic promises. Nuts and berries and plain yogurt each showed how pairing foods together changes the outcome more than eating any one of them in isolation. If you're looking for a way to judge any food beyond this list, ask yourself a few honest questions before you buy or eat it. How much fiber does this actually carry, and is it still intact or has processing stripped it away? What has been added, particularly sugar or refined starch, that wasn't part of the food to begin with? Am I eating this alongside protein or fat, or completely alone, since pairing changes the response significantly? And will I realistically eat this again next week, or is it a one-time effort that fades by Friday? Those 4 questions will serve you well long after this particular list of 11 foods. It's worth asking honestly why so much of this understanding faded from ordinary kitchens over the past couple of generations, and I don't believe there's a single villain behind it. Convenience became easier. Packaged food became available every season instead of only at harvest, and fewer families cooked together the way they once did, which meant less of this knowledge passed hand to hand the way Esther's did to her own daughters. Marketing filled some of that space with confident claims on colorful boxes, and paying close attention to a bean or a plain bowl of oats stopped feeling necessary when a bar or a shake promised to handle it instead. None of that makes anyone foolish for reaching for convenience. It only means the thread got thinner than it used to be. So here is something realistic to try this week. Choose 2 or 3 foods from this list, maybe the beans and the vinegar, and work them into meals you're already making, rather than building an entirely new routine around them. Next time you're at the store, compare a plain yogurt against a flavored one sitting on the same shelf, and read both labels side by side. Consistency across ordinary weeks matters far more than one perfect day, and that has been true in every kitchen I've ever known. I think often of Esther's kitchen on a Saturday morning, a pot of beans already started before the sun was fully up, the smell of it filling the house slowly through the day until supper. Nothing dramatic about it, just steady food made the same simple way, week after week, without needing a label to explain why it worked. Tell me in the comments which of these foods you were most surprised to see on this list, or which one has quietly been part of your own family's cooking for years, without anyone ever calling it special. I read every single one. Next time, I want to look at how the order you eat your food during a meal, not just what's on the plate, can change how your body responds to it, since that's a piece of this same puzzle most people have never been told about at all. Until then, may your table hold what your body actually needs, one steady meal at a time.